A writer named Jan Martel visits the home of Pai Patel. He has been directed here by Mamaji, an old family friend of Pai's father, who told him that Pai has a story that will make him believe in God. He cooks food for him. The writer explains why he has come. Pai listens and says yes, that story is true, and he will tell it. Pai was born in Pondicherry in the south of India. His father gave him the name Paisine Molitor Patel after a famous swimming pool in Paris that Mamaji admired deeply. Mamaji had spoken of the pool often, and Pai's father chose to honor him with the name. In school, the name becomes a source of cruelty. Other students read it from the register and turn it into a crude word, calling him Pissing Patel through primary school. By the time Pai reaches secondary school, he has a plan. On the very first day, before the teacher can call his name from the register, Pai goes to the blackboard of the first classroom and writes his nickname, Pi, the Greek letter, along with the mathematical value carried out to dozens of decimal places. He goes to every classroom in the school and writes the same thing on every board. By the end of the day, every student has seen it. From that day forward, everyone calls him Pai, and the mocking ends. Pai's father, Santosh Patel, owns and runs the Pondicherry Zoo, which sits inside the botanical garden. Pai grows up inside it and moves freely through the enclosures. He spends long hours watching the animals and learning their habits. He is particularly drawn to a Bengal tiger in one of the enclosures. The tiger's name is Richard Parker. The name is the result of a paperwork error made years before Pai was born. The hunter who caught the tiger as a cub in the Sundarbans was himself named Richard Parker. When the forestry office filed the forms, a clerk entered the names the wrong way around and registered the tiger under the hunter's name. The error was never corrected, and the name stayed with the tiger. One afternoon, Pai crouches at the bars of Richard Parker's enclosure and slowly pushes a piece of raw meat through toward the tiger. His father pulls Pai away from the bars before the tiger can reach him. His father is shaken by what could have happened. He brings Pai and his older brother Ravi to stand outside the enclosure and has a live goat put inside. Richard Parker moves toward the goat and kills it while Pai and Ravi watch. His father tells them that when you look into the eyes of a wild animal, you do not see a soul looking back at you. You see only your own reflection. The animal feels nothing for you, and it never will. This is the lesson. Pai is raised Hindu and grows up knowing the prayers, the stories, and the rituals of the faith. One day, he visits a Catholic church and speaks with a priest named Father Martin. Father Martin sits with Pai and tells him the story of Christ, a God who chose to become a man and suffer and die out of love for people. Pai is moved by this and begins visiting the church. Around the same time, Pai passes a mosque in the neighborhood and goes inside. He is drawn to the practice and begins praying on a prayer mat at home. He practices all three religions at once without giving any of them up. When his father asks him to explain himself, Pai says he simply wants to love God. His father tells him he must choose one religion. Pai says nothing. Pai is 16 when he meets a girl named Anandi at his dance class. She practices classical Indian dance. Pai develops strong feelings for her, and they begin spending time together. He thinks about her constantly during this period. Pai's father gathers the family one evening and tells them he has made a decision. The political instability caused by the emergency declared by Indira Gandhi has made him uncertain about the country's future and the safety of the zoo. He has decided to close the zoo and move the family to Canada. He has already arranged to sell the animals to various zoos in North America. The animals will be transported on a Japanese cargo freighter, and the family will travel on the same ship. Pai is unhappy about leaving everything he knows. Before they depart, Pai visits Anandi to say goodbye. They both hold each other's hands. He says goodbye to her and leaves. The Patel family boards the Japanese cargo freighter Tsimtsum at the port of Madurai. The animals are loaded into crates and secured in the hold below deck. The family is given quarters on the ship. The Tsimtsum leaves port and moves out across the Pacific Ocean toward Canada. The first days at sea are calm, and Pai spends time on the deck watching the ocean and the sky. He also goes below to the hold to check on the animals during the day. Several days into the voyage, the weather shifts. The sky darkens through the afternoon, and by evening the sea is very rough. Pai goes up to the deck to watch the storm. The waves are enormous. The ship rolls steeply and pitches in the water. Pai holds the railing as water crashes over the deck. Then the ship begins to tilt at an angle that it does not come back from. Alarm sounds start through the ship. Pi runs to tell his family about it, but the deck is filled with water. A crew member appears, grabs Pi, and throws him toward a lifeboat being lowered on cables toward the water. Pi lands inside it. A plain zebra that has broken free from its crate in the hold below runs up through the sinking ship and leaps off the side, landing hard in the lifeboat and breaking its back leg on impact. The cables snap and the lifeboat crashes down into the water. The impact throws Pi out over the side into the dark ocean. Pi swims hard through the rough water and gets back to the lifeboat. He pulls himself over the side and falls inside. He sits up and looks back toward where the Tsimtsum was. The ship's lights slide beneath the surface of the water. The Tsimtsum sinks into the Mariana Trench. Pi's entire family goes down with the ship. He calls out across the water. He calls again. Nothing answers. The rain slows and the ocean gradually settles. Pi is alone. When daylight comes, Pi looks around the lifeboat. The zebra is lying in the boat on its side with the broken leg, alive but unable to move. Then a spotted hyena pushes out from under the tarpaulin that covers the middle section of the boat. Pi moves immediately to the stern and stays there. Then he sees an orangutan floating nearby, clinging to a bundle of bananas that drifted from the wreck. She makes it to the lifeboat and pulls herself aboard. Pi is relieved to see a familiar animal from the zoo. The hyena grows increasingly agitated and attacks the helpless zebra, biting into it while the animal is still alive. Pi watches from the stern but cannot stop it. The hyena then turns its attention on the orangutan. They fight. The hyena kills her. Pi is left at the stern with only the hyena on the boat. Then the tarpaulin at the bow begins to move. Richard Parker rises slowly from beneath it. Richard Parker moves toward the hyena and kills it. Pi stares at him from the stern. He has been sharing this boat with a Bengal tiger the entire time. Pi goes through the storage compartments along the sides of the lifeboat and finds what is there: emergency biscuits, tins of water, rope, a flare gun with flares, a fishing kit with lines and hooks, and a waterproof survival manual. He reads the manual from beginning to end. He builds a small raft by tying life preservers and oars together and attaches it to the stern of the lifeboat with a long rope. He sleeps on the raft at night to put distance between himself and Richard Parker. Pi begins training Richard Parker the way the manual describes handling a dangerous animal. Each time the tiger crosses the middle of the boat into Pi's section, Pi blows the whistle sharply and rocks the boat from side to side until the tiger feels sick. He does this every single time Richard Parker moves toward him. Over several days, the tiger learns that crossing the boundary brings the sickness and begins staying in the bow. Pi also throws fish to him every day to keep him fed and calm. Pi understands clearly that keeping Richard Parker alive gives him a reason to act each day. Without that, he fears he would stop functioning. At one point, Richard Parker jumps off the lifeboat into the ocean. He swims away from the boat, going after fish. Pi watches from the stern. He thinks about what it would mean to let the tiger drown. Then he helps Richard Parker back aboard. One night, the surface of the ocean glows with bioluminescence. The water lights up in pale blue and green wherever the boat moves through it. Fish drift slowly through the lit water below the surface. A humpback whale surfaces very close to the lifeboat and breaches fully out of the water before crashing back down. The force of the wave destroys the raft Pi has been sleeping on and washes away the supplies stored there. Pi no longer has the supplies. He has to remain on the raft and manage the space between himself and the tiger directly from the stern. A school of flying fish appears around the boat and hundreds of them leap out of the water and land inside the lifeboat. Pi scares the tiger and grabs the big fish. Richard Parker catches the ones near him and feeds. Both of them eat well. He trains Richard Parker by throwing fish on the boat. Pi spots a cargo ship passing in the far distance. He fires flares into the sky to signal it. The ship does not change course and disappears over the horizon without stopping. He collects rainwater in the tarpaulin when it falls and fills the storage tins. He keeps account of the days by marking the side of the boat. Some days later, a heavy storm hits. As the waves grow enormous, boat is thrown around violently. Pi calls out to God. He shouts into the storm, addressing God directly as the water crashes over the sides. In the middle of it, Pi lifts the edge of the tarpaulin to check on Richard Parker. The tiger is inside and, visibly frightened, his body tense and his eyes wide. Pi quickly covers the tarpaulin back down to protect him. The rope of the raft breaks and his raft and supplies are gone. The storm passes in the morning, and both of them have survived. After the storm passes, Pi looks at Richard Parker and believes they are both close to dying from exhaustion and weakness. He moves toward the tiger and holds Richard Parker against him. It is the only time he touches the tiger directly like this. One morning, Pi boat drifts closer an island made entirely of dense algae and vegetation with trees growing across its surface. Pi brings the lifeboat alongside and steps onto it carefully. Hundreds of meerkats move all around him without any sign of fear. Freshwater pools sit in hollows across the island. Pi kneels at one and drinks until he is full. It is clean and fresh. Richard Parker jumps from the lifeboat onto the island and begins feeding on meerkats. Pi and Richard Parker spend the day on the island resting and eating. He notices that at night the island's pools become acidic. Fish die in them. Pi walks deeper into the island and finds a flower growing from one of the trees that is unlike the others. He opens it slowly in the dark. At the center of the flower is a human tooth. Pi holds it and looks at it. He understands that someone was on this island before him. Pi thinks the island is carnivorous. He decides not to stay in this island. He loads as much food and vegetation as the boat can carry. Richard Parker returns to the boat on his own. They leave the island behind. The lifeboat eventually drifts to the coast of Mexico. Pi steps off the boat and drops into the shallow water and falls on the beach. Richard Parker gets to his feet. He walks up the sand until he reaches the place where the beach ends and the jungle begins. He stops there at the edge of the trees. Pi watches him. He waits for Richard Parker to turn and look back at him before going into the jungle. Richard Parker does not look back. He walks into the trees and is gone. Pi later tells the writer that after all those months together, after everything they endured side by side, the tigers simply walked away. People from a nearby village find him lying there and carry him. He is taken to a hospital in Mexico. While Pi is still recovering in the hospital, two insurance agents from the Japanese freight company that owned the ship arrive at his bedside. They sit down with notepads and explain that they are investigating the sinking of the ship. Pi tells them the story. One of them says they cannot use this story in an official maritime report. They ask him for a version without the animals. Pi tells them a second version. For people survived the sinking and reached the lifeboat: Pi, his mother, a Buddhist sailor with a broken leg, and the ship's cook. The cook was rough and controlling from the start. When the sailor's leg became infected, the cook cut it off and used the flesh as fishing bait. The sailor died. The cook then killed Pi's mother. Pi killed the cook in anger. The agents sit quietly with their notepads. One of them says that in both versions the ship sinks, everyone else dies, and Pi survives alone. He says there is no way to verify one story over the other. The agents close their notepads and leave the room. Back in the Montreal apartment, Pi finishes telling the story. He looks at Jan Martel and asks which version he prefers, the story with the tiger or the story without. The writer says the story with the tiger. Pi says, and so it goes with God. The writer looks at the insurance report sitting on the table. It states that Pi Patel survived in the company of an adult Bengal tiger.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit like and subscribe for more movie explanations. Comment below your favorite moment. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.